Next story this week, then, we're talking about the latest unemployment figures. So, the Office for National Statistics has come out and said it's now reached 5.1%. That's the highest level in 5 years. And it was actually the end of last year, these unemployment figures in respect of, so between October and December, there's a bit of a lag in this data. We're still expecting unemployment to peak in the summer, around the summer sometime. The Bank of England are forecasting it to reach about 7.4, 7.5% in the summer. Much, of course, is going to depend on what the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, comes up with next week around an extension to the furlough scheme. And a number of newspapers have already called an extension through to June or July. But there was an interesting thing, I think, in these unemployment figures, that the real impact, the brunt of this unemployment seems to be hitting younger people, the under 25s. So just below your generation. You're a little bit older than that. But what did you make of these latest unemployment figures?
I'm kind of surprised they're not worse.
Mm.
And obviously that's because of the furlough scheme. It's because people have been kept artificially employed that these figures aren't sky high. Imagine if we didn't have the furlough scheme.
Yeah.
Imagine the amount of people that would be unemployed. It would be crazy. It's not surprising that young people are disproportionately affected because young people are typically those that are working in the likes of hospitality, retail and leisure, travel as well, all those sectors that have been hit really, really hard by coronavirus. And even though the furlough scheme is an option, it's not an option for absolutely everybody. It still costs business money. And of course, there are businesses that have just gone bust completely.
Mm.
So Arcadia, I know we've talked about, employs thousands of people that will now be out of work. So yeah, it does all hinge on the furlough scheme, and Boris Johnson dropped a big hint, I would say, at least it's a big, big hint, when he was making the announcement about our roadmap out of lockdown. And he said that he wasn't about to pull the rug out from anyone that was making use of the schemes, I think, or
Mm.
was unemployed. So I would, if I had to bet money, I would definitely bet that the furlough scheme will continue. And then in the summer, this kind of goes into what we're going to talk about in a little bit as well, but I wonder how quickly certain industries will pick back up. I would actually suggest
Yeah.
that retail will suffer the most out of all of the industries I mentioned a second ago, but we can talk about that more later. But there is some better news as well as
Mm.
these sort of not great figures. Separate research came out, I think the day before yesterday, that said that more than half of employers intend to recruit staff in the next 3 months.
Mm.
The downside, I suppose, to this is that there's the sectors with kind of that strongest hiring intention are things like healthcare, finance, insurance, education, and ICT,
Yeah.
which are also sectors that I don't think have been hit particularly hard by the coronavirus, certainly not in terms of making people redundant. So I think there will be a collection of people who are typically lower earners, who typically work in consumer facing roles,
Mm.
and they are the most at risk of redundancy going forward and will be the ones having to look for a new job in a very, very tricky environment.
Yeah, I mean that to me sounded very bullish. That was it. Half of employers planning to recruit in the next 3 months. Um, I don't know. I get a lot of feedback. So I'm a member of our local chamber of commerce. I'm on the committee there, so I speak to lots of our local businesses, and that is retail, predominantly retail. So it's a very different set of circumstances for them, but it feels very bullish. I don't see that appetite to recruit and to relaunch, even though we're going to come on and talk about this roadmap to recovery in a moment. But even with those dates now available, where we're expecting non-essential retail to reopen and leisure and everything else, I think there still needs to be an awful lot of government support to get people not just to those dates, but beyond them. Because it's going to take time, I think, for businesses to get back on their own 2 feet, to even think about not recruiting staff, but bringing staff back off furlough, because it's a huge financial commitment to have somebody on your payroll and to have to cover that cost and the cost of their national insurance and their pension and everything else on top of it. And there was some other data in there. So the ONS was saying that there was a small increase in the number of people on payroll, 83,000 more between December and January. And that again surprised me. And maybe it's just the sectors I'm looking at, but I'm just not seeing that pick up in activity yet. I know the various sectors do appear to be weathering this latest lockdown much better than previous ones, and they've almost worked out how to trade through it, whether that's click and collect or online ordering, that sort of thing. But I don't see that optimism out there. Are you seeing that optimism I may be missing?
No, not. I mean, working at City AM, obviously, we do a lot of talking to big kind of city companies,
Mm,
and a lot of the feedback we get actually is that they're pretty optimistic about the future. I think they're looking at this as sort of a bump in the road, if you
mm,
like, and that life will go on and everything will kind of be okay in the near term, which makes sense for those industries though, because they have lived in a world where they were very, very easily able to transfer to work from home.
yeah.
The vast majority of their employees were able to carry on working as they would in the office. There wasn't this big lag on productivity. Inevitably, there would have been issues around with customers and things like that,
Mm,
but it wasn't this world-ending moment for them in the same way.
mm,
So I totally agree. I mean, we've talked many times about this being a pandemic of two halves,
yeah.
and those industries very much affected by this. I can't see them suddenly going on hiring sprees.
No.
I don't think that's going to happen in the slightest, actually.
No, and even with the sort of government support that seems to be in place at the moment, is likely to be extended next week, next Wednesday at the budget, which is like the Kickstart scheme. So getting people off universal credit and fully funding, in some case, their employment for a year. I mean, that's an incredible incentive for employers, but it's not necessarily the caliber of staff that many employers are looking for at that very sort of entry level. So even that, I don't think is going to support a massive return to employment. The other figure from the ONS, along with these unemployment figures, was that average pay, including bonuses, had risen by 4.7%. And that, to me, again, looked incredible. But then they caveated that and saying it was a statistical quirk. And it's simply because, and trying to explain it in simple terms, if you lose lots of younger people from the employment mix, or these under 25, so 3 and 5 of the roles are under 25, they tend to be lower earners. You take them out and it pushes up the average wage for everyone else. So the average figure goes higher. So they think the underlying average pay increase was probably less than 3%, which feels a bit more realistic. And they also said, again, on a positive note, that many people who lost their jobs early on in the pandemic have now started looking for work again. I don't know what they've been doing since last March, so April, May, but now they're going back out and looking for work. And that might reduce the claimant count for universal credit, for example. And that's the other thing we're looking forward to in the budget next week is, will Rishi Sunak extend the £20 a week universal credit weekly top up? Yeah, possibly that will help the situation too. But longer term, I think I'm optimistic about the economy. I think we're going to have a good, strong recovery. I just don't see it happening in the next 3 to 6 months. I think that's going to be a very tricky period for businesses.
Yep, I completely agree. I am very optimistic about our recovery, actually. And I was watching an economist talk about this on YouTube, and he put it really, really well. Because I was kind of looking up, okay, well, how does this crash differ from the 2008 crash? Because I wanted a nice way to be
Mm,
able to explain this. And he sort of said, well, it's kind of like, imagine both scenarios are a leak in your bathroom. Both are a problem. There's something you have to deal with. But the 2008 leak, if you like, came as a result of rotting pipes and really, like, the insides of walls falling apart, just these
mm,
really huge systemic problems that are very, very difficult to fix, and happened as a buildup of a long, long, long time and involve, everything. This particular leak is a bit more like having something stuck in your plug hole. It's something that's happened very, very quickly, and yes, it still needs fixing, but ultimately, as soon as you get that thing out of the plug hole, which in this particular example would be getting the coronavirus to a manageable point where
mm.
we can go out and spend our money and live our lives and really get the economy going again, that's actually a very, very easy fix. And I imagine that, assuming that there are no horrific variants that come over and completely derail the vaccine program, which I think is the main risk that we face, I think probably in a year's time we're going to be looking pretty good.
Yeah.